I go ahead and introduce. Oh yeah, I got Andre here. Oops, I was going to bring. I told you I was going to probably mess that up. Anyway, yeah, we are here to celebrate the legacy of Jimmy Carter, who passed away yesterday, December 29th, 2024. Um, and Jimmy Carter, of course, was president of the United States from January 1977 to January 1981. Uh, the longest lived president, born October 1st, 1924. So that's insane to think about. He was president before I was even alive. And I'm not a young man like Andre here. But Andre here, yeah, Andre, why don't you introduce yourself to those who are not familiar with you?
Well, hi, my name is Andre Dutra, and I have a channel not too different from Mr. Beats where I talk about American history and culture. And yeah, I wanted to say a rest in peace to Jimmy Carter, a truly magnificent and inspiring life, that spans so much of American history. People always talk about American history being so short compared to that of other nations. And I think you can really feel that in the life of Jimmy Carter.
Yeah. Well, and you tend to go a little bit deeper than I do with your research, and I really appreciate that. And that's one reason why I wanted to have you on, because you made a video about Jimmy, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But more specific aspect of his presidency. But so before we get into his legacy, though, I do want to just go over the basics about his life. There's a lot of young folks that do really. They love Jimmy Carter, but there's also a lot of young folks who have no idea who he is. So I mean, when we think about Jimmy Carter, a lot of times we just see this old man, but like pictures like this. Let me put this on the screen. Like you usually think of because yeah, I mean, he was president a long time ago, the 1970s, for crying out loud. But I would say most older people, they think about seeing, that's all you see here on this images that pop up. But when you think about someone like my parents, who my mom and dad were, they had just graduated high school and were 19, 20 years old when he became president. They think of him. He looks like this, and so I just think. It's just weird when somebody lives that long. You don't really. I feel like there's these weird perceptions about him in terms of I looked it up, and I'm always fascinated by how presidential historians rank presidents. And Jimmy Carter has been pretty much in the middle of the rankings for a while. The most recent one that was released in 2021 by C-SPAN had him down at number 26 here. But interestingly, he went up a spot since the last time they did it in 2017. I forgot that he was actually more popular back in 2000. He was the 22nd highest ranked president. But notably, he is below folks like Grover Cleveland, Calvin Coolidge, William Howard Taft. He's still above James Garfield, Gerald Ford, George W. Bush, but not by much. So I would say that still today he's viewed as one of the more weaker presidents, although almost universally is seen as just a good person. So just some basics about him. Again, he was born in Georgia, specifically Plains, Georgia. Again, October 1st, 1924. He was raised, kind of had I mean, his life, he was the first president born in a hospital. He had a pretty, I would say, decent upbringing. In my song, I say that he hanging out with all the black kids, because remember, Georgia was a pretty racist place in the 1920s, 1930s, but he did live near a bunch of African American families, and he befriended many nearby. That's why I sing that part in the song. But anyway, jump ahead to after he graduates high school. He went to Plains High School. He was a great athlete. Also, really good grades, really smart guy. But he decides to go into the United States Naval Academy. That was his one of his dreams was to serve in the Navy, and he does have a naval career that's he times it right though. Like he joins the Navy right as World War II is ending. So, but still has like this weird situation where he like has a exposure to radiation when he was in the Navy. Are you familiar with that, Andre?
Yeah.
Yeah. That deserves a whole separate video, but I'm just as a brief rundown right now. So anyway, so that was in 1952. After he was done being in the Navy, like there's this misconception that Jimmy Carter was inherited a lot of wealth. He did not. He was pretty self-made. He became a peanut farmer and struggled in the beginning. In fact, he had to take out a lot of debt to pay for that farm because things were not going well. But after a few years, he did pretty well to a point where he didn't even have to work that much anymore. He was able to hire extra help. He had always been into politics. So by the 1960s, he was like, you know what? I think I want to actually run for local office. And he does run for state senator in Georgia for the state legislature, is elected. Then he runs for governor. He's the underdog in pretty much every race he runs in. Like usually he's not somebody who's known as like a really popular guy, doesn't have a whole lot of friends, kind of a chill, soft-spoken guy that he does. Another thing is he's not like the type of person to suck up to a lot of people and, I'll scratch your back if you scratch mine. It's not like a political, like he didn't view it as a game. Politics, he didn't view politics as a game. He just really passionately cared about helping people. I think that's pretty notable because I think that's kind of goes against our perception of most politicians. And that's one reason why, yeah, like a few people gave him a chance to win when he ran for governor. But yeah, he failed. His first campaign failed. He did his second campaign. He won. He was sworn in as the 76th governor of Georgia on January 12th, 1971. I didn't memorize that. I had that brought up here. And as far as like how he ran, he was definitely a conservative, but I would say like a more moderate, centrist type conservative, somebody who was clearly like anti-segregation, pro-civil rights, but at the same time, I would say leaned to the right on economics, like very pro-small business, less government intervention in the economy, but also socially conservative, a very religious person, Baptist, religious his entire life. I would say the older he got, the more religious he became. But yeah, civil rights were a big priority for him, especially based on his experiences with African Americans growing up in the Deep South. The only other like Deep South president, I think, in modern times, other than like maybe LBJ, right? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think
there's Bill Clinton in Arkansas as well.
Yeah, that is technically Deep South, isn't it? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I was weird to think of, because it's not that far away from where I live, where he grew up. And so I'm just like, yeah, dang, maybe I'm a Southerner. Okay, but no. So jump ahead to him. He just decides, almost seems like randomly, to run for president. And this is in 1974. There's already other people that are. In fact, there's a lot of people that want to run for president. They are just like, oh, they can't wait to defeat Gerald Ford, who was not that popular, especially after he pardoned Richard Nixon. The whole Republican Party is not that popular. So whoever gets the Democratic nomination for the election of 1976 is probably going to win, especially since the economy isn't doing that well with stagflation and energy prices going way up. But Jimmy Carter, like, he's a big time dark horse underdog. Nobody knows who he is. There's that common, there's a phrase going around by his opponents, so like, Jimmy who? But he surprises everyone by doing well in Iowa and New Hampshire. In fact, the whole reason why there's so much emphasis on the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary to this day is because of Jimmy Carter. Otherwise, it would, because he became a front runner early on because he did so well in the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary. Anyway, he goes on to win the nomination, does pretty well in debates with Gerald Ford. And well, Gerald Ford didn't really help himself. But yeah, like he is easily wins election. And he runs as a Democrat who is, again, fairly conservative by modern standards, like in terms of the economy and social issues. Personally, he says he's pro-life, although he has more moderate positions overall on that. He runs on like, hey, we need to balance the budget. We need to like stop spending. Like Washington D.C. has too much power. I'm an outsider because I've never been in Congress. I was just in state politics. I was a state legislator and governor. So I'm really going to shake things up. We're going to have more deregulation, stuff like that. He gets in there though, and the economy continues to suck. You have more stagflation. He does do like a few notable things like, and Andre, you can chime in actually anytime you want. Like I'm starting to ramble, but like, yeah, I think one of the first things that he does that's notable is he pardons all of the Vietnam War draft evaders. I thought that was a pretty bold move right from the get-go that he does. Yeah, like how much do you know, Andre, about like when he first became president? Like, did you read that much about his when he first got in there? Like,
yeah. So the thing about Carter is that he was very anti-political. Is a really important thing to note. You know, I think that the Vietnam draft dodgers is a really good example because most presidents would save their unpopular pardons for the end of their presidency, you know, when they're a lame duck. Jimmy Carter goes and campaigns on the promise that he will pardon Vietnam draft dodgers. And he doesn't really take the politics of that into account. And he does it as soon as he becomes president. And there's a lot of fallout and controversy from it. But he's like, no, I wanted to do this. I don't want to wait for it to be politically expedient. And there's stories people tell that when you told him that something was good politically, he would tell you to shut up. He'd say he did not want to hear that. He did not care about political ramifications, which, while admirable on a personal level, did lead to a lot of the issues that he encountered in the White House. You know, I think it's important to think about Jimmy Carter in context because this is coming in the aftermath of Watergate, of the Vietnam War, at a time that people are really skeptical of Washington. And Jimmy Carter is really the first president in a long line of Washington outsiders. You know, there's a joke that Jimmy Carter used to tell where he'd say, he told his mom he was running for president, and she asked, president of what? As if like the idea of him running for president was just so crazy and foreign in that way, you know?
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter is supposed to be this guy from outside of Washington who's not your traditional politician. And in many ways, he really isn't. And he comes in and he's supposed to change things up. And another thing that's really interesting about the start of his presidency is that he brings in all of his own team from Georgia. He doesn't employ a lot of like the Washington sort of staffers that you usually expect. And he would kind of look down on politicians and on politics in general. He brings in people like Hamilton Jordan, who really don't have any experience with how Washington works. And it's really interesting because he sends a lot of bills to Congress. And I know you talk a lot about pragmatism as something that you really value. Jimmy Carter was a very pragmatic man, very non-ideological. You know, I always say that he was an engineer and he always approached government as an engineering problem. He always thought, if I have this data that shows that this is empirically the right decision, that's what I'll go with. And it was that led to a lot of the troubles in the communication of his White House, is he would have a hard time understanding why the American people couldn't just go with what was empirically true, you know, what the numbers were telling them to do.
Yeah. And we'll get to like his communication abilities as well here in a moment. But I think that kind of ties into it well. But before we do, I wanted to kind of highlight something because there was a statement by President Biden. Yeah, he's still president. Yes. And he just basically praises him. The statement itself isn't that noteworthy, but what I think is really important for people who are people who have no idea, the younger folks that are not aware of Jimmy Carter's presidency, is Joe Biden is basically the opposite of Jimmy Carter in terms of, I think, what he brought to the table. Like Joe Biden is like the definition in the dictionary of a DC insider, basically somebody who first served in Congress in the early 1970s. In fact, he met with Jimmy Carter when he was president. I believe multiple times. They got along pretty well. But yeah, like the reason why Joe Biden had so much success, I think, with Congress as president in his 4 years here is because of that experience. With trying to build support for legislation, where Jimmy Carter did not have that experience, and yeah, he had a hard time getting along with a lot of members of Congress because they're like, "Who's this guy?" And he wasn't necessarily like all warm and fuzzy, a nice guy, but like he didn't necessarily have the charisma I think needed. So, I mean, Joe Biden famously got along with people across the aisle, people that ideologically were different than him. He was able to get much bipartisan legislation passed as a senator, and as president even was able to get those. I mean, not much, but some. Yeah. So
Yeah, go
ahead.
No, there's a really interesting story about Carter that I think reflects that well. That he was going through the budget one year, and he was looking at all these federal dams that were being built across the country, and he was, from an engineering perspective, he's like, he knew we didn't need those dams. This doesn't make sense to have. These projects are way too expensive. But so without consulting anybody, he just decides he's going to take those dams out of the budget. Then all of a sudden, he's getting calls from countless congressmen being like, hey, what are you doing canceling this federal project that's bringing jobs to my district? And I think that really sums up Jimmy Carter very, very well. There's a great Tip O'Neill clip from an interview where they ask him about Jimmy Carter, and they bring up the Iranian hostage crisis, and they're asking him to talk about that, and he's like, Jimmy Carter is probably the smartest president we ever had. No other president could tell you as much about defense, about environmental issues, about any given subject. He knows more than his secretary on those topics. But I could never work with Jimmy Carter. I agreed with Ronald Reagan on a lot less than I did with Jimmy Carter, but with Ronald Reagan, I can make a deal with him. And I think that is really fundamental to understanding.
It is, especially since Tip O'Neill, of course, the famous Speaker of the House, that he was actually famously really good with working with people that disagreed with him. And that's why he was one of the better ones. Like if you can't get along with him, then that's a big red flag there. Yeah. So I also just want to go through the other highlights of his presidency. Like in terms of events that were going on, my parents used to tell me about the oil crisis, the energy crisis, and how those OPEC countries, the Middle Eastern countries that did not want to play ball anymore with the United States, and so there were embargoes, and so we had less oil being imported, and so this led to scarce supply. I mean, famously, the long lines at gas stations. This really peaked during the Carter administration, and so he did a number of things to fight that. Symbolically, he said maybe we should look for alternative sources of energy, which notably put solar panels on the roof of the White House. I was actually going to try to find pictures of that because it was just crazy. In the 1970s, solar panels on the White House. And then, of course, Ronald Reagan takes them down after that. But yeah, also, like, he was ahead of his time in other ways. Like, he was the first president that I could find that reached out to the LGBT plus community and actually said, hey, we need to, oh, here, I think I found a picture of popped up finally. Yeah. The reach out to that community, because that was like completely unheard of at the time as well. He was also considered like a rock star president, like the first president who so many famous musicians and actors all openly supported and just hung out with. Like, you know, there's pictures of him hanging out with Willie Nelson. Let me see if I can find that picture. Oh, and here he's yeah, there it is. That's the one I was thinking of. So stuff like that. There's a documentary about this if you want to learn more about how, I think it's even called Rockstar President.
It's Jimmy Carter, Rock and Roll President. It's a great documentary.
Okay, yeah. But no, back to the serious stuff. Like, okay, obviously everything was overshadowed by the Iran hostage crisis, which I made a video about that if you want to learn more. But the short of it is, you had what was it, 61 Americans that were taken hostage at an embassy in Iran, and they were kept for the remaining portion of his presidency, and he worked tirelessly to try to get them rescued, and it just was a disaster. This was, I view it as basically the biggest failure of his presidency. 444 days these hostages were held. Some of them treated horribly. Most of them survived and eventually were rescued. It happened at the end of the his presidency. But I think a big like Reagan gets credit. Reagan gets credit because technically they came home under his watch, but I think most historians now say, nah, it was pretty much Carter that got them home, and he did a lot of stuff that the American public didn't know about. Do you have any thoughts specifically about how he handled the Iran hostage crisis, Andre?
Yeah, I mean, I think that diplomacy is a really important lens to look at the Carter presidency through. I think that that's where a lot of his most notable accomplishments, but also his most notable failures are, especially when it comes to the Iranian hostage crisis. I think that it really contributed to this view of him as a weak leader. And it's ironic because he is someone who cared very deeply about what was going on, and he just could not manage to bring them home. And I think that's something that really weighed on him in a personal level. And it's interesting to think that in the way that people talk about him there as sort of like inept or incompetent in bringing them home, when he really was trying everything he could and he just couldn't manage the situation properly.
It was a difficult situation to manage.
Yeah.
And he did have other foreign policy successes, though. You look at the Camp David Accords. It brought more peace and stability to the region, the Middle East, I would say, than was there before.
I think we don't bring up China enough with Jimmy Carter. That's another important part of his legacy, was continuing normalization. There's if you want to pull it up, there's a really amazing photograph that I love of Deng Xiaoping came to visit the U.S. during the Carter administration. There's a picture of him at a rodeo with a cowboy hat on, and that was like a big cultural victory for the United States. Was a big symbol of soft power, and us really getting out there and being able to have those cultural victories. There you go. And it's so funny too because he's wearing his like his little regalia that you associate with Chinese leaders.
I think Deng Xiaoping is underrated as a world leader. I think it's, especially now when you look at Xi Jinping is like, oh gosh, I wish we had Deng back in there. Dang, I miss Deng. Anyway, sorry. So yeah, Jimmy Carter, lots of successes that people forget about with foreign policy, but Iran overshadows them all. The other thing that we could bring up is Soviet Union. I think the policy of detente continuing started with Nixon, continued under Ford, but then with the SALT II treaty, we need to get rid of nuclear weapons. But then right before, like his last year in office, we have some tensions go back up. And so I think that's also another negative to his presidency in terms of the Soviet Union is still they're up to their shenanigans. They are still being a bit imperialistic. Yemen, Afghanistan, and then of course the Olympics boycott and all this. And so Carter talks trash again. So their tensions go up a little bit with the Soviet Union. But overall, I think he kind of has a mixed legacy on foreign policy. And I think he does get too much. I don't know. I think people talk too much trash about him. And it's always the Iran hostage crisis. I guess you could also say like how he managed the economy. What are your thoughts about how he managed the economy? I mean, even though presidents don't have that much influence, I know, but.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting there is that people always talk about Ronald Reagan sort of bringing on a conservative era of American politics, but Jimmy Carter was really the first one that started going in that sort of neoliberal direction. You know, he was the first post New Deal order president. He was the one who really moderated in that regard, talked more about fiscal responsibility, as you mentioned, balancing the budget. And it's interesting that Reagan would be a reaction to him, you know, considering he was one of the most conservative Democrat of that time on the economy. And it's really, especially in the way that he managed it, he was taking a very pragmatic approach. He was like, okay, I'm cutting spending where I think spending needs to be cut. And that's the thing is I feel like I go back to a lot of the failures of messaging, because I think that if Carter had been a better messenger, he could have sort of united the country in like a FDR Great Depression sort of way against a common issue. Like, this is a common threat that we need to go against as Americans. And he tried to do that in his crisis of confidence speech, you know, but he asked Americans for self-sacrifice, and I guess we just weren't very suited for that culturally, you know.
Yeah. I mean, he tried to even do his own fireside chat thing modeled after FDR, which he didn't seem to have the charisma that FDR had, which, you know, but just more on the economy. I think his biggest accomplishments, and this is really going to make some of my viewers mad who are not fans of neoliberalism, but I don't think all neoliberalism is bad. I mean, we like to just like oversimplify things, but we've got to realize just how bad inflation was in the 1970s. I mean, it was stagflation too. So compounded, you have high unemployment combined with high inflation. Unless you actually live through it, it's maybe hard for these younger folks to understand. Like, we had bad inflation in 2021, 2022. It was nowhere near as bad as the inflation of the 1970s. Can't, you know, you basically can't save money. I guess if you're watching in Argentina, you can relate to this. So like this was a high priority for Jimmy Carter. So anything you could do to increase competition in the economy, and that's what I think his greatest accomplishments were, signing these laws that deregulated markets like the airline industry in particular, the Motor Carrier Act, the Staggers Rail Act, the Depository Institutions Deregulation and Monetary Control Act, say that 3 times fast, deregulating the beer industry for those beer drinkers out there. The reason why we have such wide selection of beers today goes,
I didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, back in the 70s, all they had was like Budweiser, a couple others. It was horrible. So just like, I mean, in many ways, he was like the most libertarian president we've ever had, which is insane to think about because Reagan came after him. But then Reagan gets into office, and a few years later, there's interviews you can see Carter is like talking trash about Reagan because Reagan is not balancing the budget. He is increasing the deficits each year, especially with military spending.
Yeah, the defense spending is.
But okay, let's talk about the communication piece, because I do think this is so important about how we perceive Jimmy Carter today. Is like, I'm going to play a little clip of this. You can see they just reposted this on the archives, CBS News. So we'll just play a little bit of this clip. And then I want to get your reaction to, because this is the famous speech you were talking about, the malaise speech, the crisis of confidence. You can watch the whole thing later if you want. to put a link in the description and maybe a pinned comment. But in the meantime, let's just hear the beginning of it, and you'll kind of get an idea of how it went. Better plug my headphones in here so it doesn't sound weird. Okay.
This is a special night for me. Exactly 3 years ago, on July 15th, 1976, I accepted the nomination of my party to run for President of the United States. I promised you a president who is not isolated from the people, who feels your pain and who shares your dreams, and who draws his strength and his wisdom from you. During the past 3 years, I've spoken to you on many occasions about national concerns, the energy crisis, reorganizing the government, our nation's economy, and issues of war, and especially peace. But over those years, the subjects of the speeches, the talks, and the press conferences have become increasingly narrow, focused more and more on what the isolated world of Washington thinks is important. Gradually, you've heard more and more about what the government thinks, or what the government should be doing, and less about our nation's hopes, our dreams, and our vision of the future. 10 days ago, I had planned to speak to you again about a very important subject, energy. For the 5th time, I would have described the urgency of the problem and laid out a series of legislative recommendations to the Congress. But as I was preparing to speak, I began to ask myself the same question that I now know has been troubling many of you. Why have we not been able to get together as a nation to resolve our serious energy problem? It's clear that the true problems of our nation are much deeper than gasoline lines or energy shortages, deeper even than inflation or recession. And I realize more than ever that as president, I need your help. So I decided to reach out and to listen to the voices of America. I invited to Camp David people from almost every segment of our society, business and labor, teachers and preachers, governors, mayors, and private citizens. And then I left Camp David to listen to other Americans, men and women like you. It has been an extraordinary 10 days. And I want to share with you what I've heard. First of all, I got a lot of personal advice. Let me quote a few of the typical comments that I wrote down. This from a Southern governor. Mr. President, you're not leading this nation. You're just managing the government. You don't see the people enough anymore. Some of your cabinet members don't seem loyal. There is not enough discipline among your disciples. Don't talk to us about politics or the mechanics of government, but about an understanding of our common good. Mr. President, we're in trouble. Talk to us about blood and sweat and tears. If you lead, Mr. President, we will follow. Many people talked about themselves and about the condition of our nation. This from a young woman in Pennsylvania.
All right, yeah. So
I feel so far.
let's go ahead. This is a long thing, but we're getting the gist of it already. So Andre, what's so significant about this speech?
I think that statement from the Southern governor really sticks with me. Mr. President, you're not leading. You're not leading the nation. You're just managing the government. I think that is a really, really strong summation of the Carter administration. You know, that sort of impersonal, kind of cold, calculated approach to politics. It's so funny because Jimmy Carter was famously not a very good orator. And leading up to the speech, if you read about it, he was trying really, really hard. He famously had very awkward hand motions. And if you wash his hands, he's being very authoritative. He's trying very hard to communicate well. And the message is coming along strongly. but it's just, I think the message itself, the sort of it's more real. It's more of a realist message. It's more, hey, there is a issue in the American spirit, in the culture that we've been having. We've been too consumerist. We are not engaging enough with self-sacrifice, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that the optimistic vision that Reagan was able to lay out, it's so important to think of this president that's an engineer who communicates very coldly and directly compared to the president who is an actor who can form a story, you know, an inspiring story, an optimistic vision for America. I think that's a huge difference, and that's fundamental to understanding the Carter legacy.
Well put. It's clear he has such passion in this speech. Like, you can really feel the passion, but the coldness is also there that you mentioned, and the fact that, you know, it's people a lot of times don't want to hear the truth, and he's a lot of times in this speech he's telling the truth. Like, this is something I've had a hard time grappling with, you know, over the years. Like, I try to be. I mean, we both run educational channels, and we don't want to like have people turn into doomers. You know, we want to give them hope. This is something that was appealing about Obama when I was a young man. Like, oh yeah, he always talked about hope. That was his whole campaign. It was on the posters and everything. Even Bill Clinton, who, if you compare Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter, which, by the way, they didn't really get along that well, at least when Clinton was president.
I like to say that they're actually polar opposites, Bill Clinton and Jimmy Carter.
Well, what I was going to say is that they sound the same. They're both Southerners, but yeah, like Bill Clinton had all this charisma, like, hey, you know, like everybody loved him, even though I think a lot of times his policies kind of sucked, but he was just more likable as a person. Like, imagine Jimmy Carter going through the scandal, the Monica Lewinsky scandal. I mean, Jimmy Carter, it would have been so much worse for him, despite the fact, this is crazy to think about, despite the fact that I think morally, Jimmy Carter was just a better person than Bill Clinton. Like, he got into a bunch of controversy for saying that he told Playboy magazine that, yeah, sometimes I lust for other women. Like, I have these thoughts in my head, like, oh my gosh. So you're like 99.9% of men, and yet that was controversial. Whereas if Bill Clinton would have said the same thing, I bet you nobody would have even cared, you know?
It's funny because early in the speech, Jimmy Carter says the line that ended up being famous with Bill Clinton, "I feel your pain." but more on that point is that like, Bill Clinton is this very, very talented politician, a once in a generation politician who's very undisciplined personally. Yeah. Jimmy Carter is the complete foil of that. He's this man who, while he's very personally disciplined, and then if you read about Jimmy Carter, there's so much in his personal work ethic that is so inspiring and that you could like learn from in your everyday life. And it's so shocking to see a man of such discipline be so politically reckless as Jimmy Carter was, you know, because I do think at a certain point there's the fist again. Yeah, it's exactly that. He's trying to be authoritative.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's that it's kind of hard to square the I want to be a good man. I want to get in there and shake up Washington, and I want to have all these high-minded policies, and sort of, in a lot of ways, he felt like he was above the politics of Washington, you know? And he wasn't really willing to play there. He wasn't willing to do the backslapping. And I do think that was the ultimate folly of his presidency, was that sort of failure to work within the Washington system.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll I guess we'll end that. You can watch that speech on your own, but I think it does sum up a lot. It says so much about him. And I think that because of everything we've been describing as far as his communication abilities, which I think it's so important to like how we view a good president oftentimes is just like how well they're able to communicate. And I think that's also been a problem with Joe Biden the last 4 years. He can barely talk. And yeah, so I think that's why, like, we had, wow, 45 years after this, after he left off, well, almost 43 years after he left office, where we saw kind of a different side of Jimmy Carter. Um, and it felt like the chains had been, taken away off of him. He was free. And he realized that, hey, I'm a former president. That doesn't mean I have no power. I can still have a lot of influence. And so he went on to actually travel the world with a lot of, I would say, thankless efforts, like with diplomacy around the world, because he truly cared about world peace, and he wanted to continue to have an impact, especially during the Clinton years, like even going to places like North Korea. Yeah. So after, like, what are your general thoughts, Andre, about Jimmy Carter after his presidency?
Yeah, I think that the diplomacy that you were touching on is such an important part of Carter's legacy, and I wanted to give a little bit of context on that before I shared more of my thoughts there. But I think Carter really honed his diplomatic skills in growing up in the American South during a time of segregation. Jimmy Carter, like we were talking about him being friends with Black people as a young man. And a lot of those Black people that he was friends with were the people that worked on his dad's farm and the children of people who worked on his dad's farm. There's a famous story of him going to town with a Black friend of his, and they just sat on different sides of the bus, and Jimmy Carter didn't challenge that at all, because in his mind, it was just the normal thing, right? It was sitting separately. And as he got older and as his racial views moderated and became more acceptable to what we think today, he sort of had to reckon with talking to these people that he loved, that he grew up with, that had very disgusting views on race, and that is part of where he honed his diplomacy, was working between those two sides. And that's how he was able to moderate so well between like Israel and Egypt while he was president, is that he was able to get these two ideals that feel mutually exclusive together. And I think that's why, as you were saying, Jimmy Carter flourished in his post-presidency, was having the prestige of the presidency to be able to bring people to the table and not be shackled by the politics, to just be able to sit down with people and make them have conversations, is part of why he was able to be so effective.
Yeah, and he moved further and further to the left post-presidency as well, because anytime he was interviewed and spoke about contemporary issues of the day, I realized, like, wow, he changed his mind. Like, I think all the best presidents, all the best politicians in history are the ones who, after they got new evidence, they changed their mind about things. And the older they got, they did become even more pragmatic than they were when they were younger. And I think Jimmy Carter, that's why I like a lot of the jokes here the last few years by young people. Is like, Jimmy Carter should run again for a second term. I know he lost against Ronald Reagan in 1980, but hey, it's not too late. He could still do it. I mean, like, it is crazy to think that this guy who is very religious, like Southern Baptist, still continued to have evolving views that pushed him further and further to the left the older he got. I do think that what drove it more than anything, though, was his, just like you were hinting at, the compassion he had, like the realizing that, because he listened to people, and he realized that what I'm being taught, like Jesus's message, this is like not jiving with how we have laws. Like Jesus wouldn't treat these folks like crap. Why are we treating them like crap? Type of situation, even with like other marginalized groups that were not brought up as much, like the LGBT plus community. Most famously, though, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I was gonna say that Carter really had a Christian sense of duty. I think is a really important way to say it. I have there's a great book about Jimmy Carter behind me called His Very Best, that kind of tells the story of the name of the book comes from a story of while Carter was in the Navy, that he was interviewing for a position, and I think the admiral that was interviewing him asked him if he had done his very best at his current job, and he was honest, and he told him no. and he ended up getting the position because the admiral appreciated his honesty. But he like sort of made him. He asked him there, why haven't you done your very best? You should always do your best. And I think Jimmy Carter really took that to heart. And I think that for the rest of his life, he did try his best at everything that he did, almost to a frustrating point. You know, this man was 90 years old, recovering from surgery, building houses for Habitat for Humanity. And people in his personal life, even his kids, would talk about how at times frustrating it was. Like, he would make them feel bad for not doing enough, and that he was always up and he was always doing something, and that he never wasted his time. He was always trying to help others to a frustrating degree, you know. From that perspective, just being something very difficult, a very difficult man to keep up with in terms of his energy and his sheer dedication. I think that, I don't know, it's a very valuable lesson that we can all take from Jimmy Carter, in my opinion. It's just that sense of duty, that sense of always doing the best you can.
Yeah. He founded the New Baptist Covenant, an organization that it still exists. Its whole thing is like fighting for social justice, but through that lens of like the teachings of Jesus Christ. And I said Southern Baptist. He wasn't really Southern. He was a different type of Baptist, but he tried to unite all Baptists. And I would argue that he pushed a lot of Baptists to social justice causes in his post-presidency quite a bit. But yeah, most famously, you mentioned this, that he was known as somebody who strongly supported Habitat for Humanity. Here's a picture of him. I mean, he was out there. He didn't just give them money or give speeches. He was actually out there every year building houses. This is an organization that I'm pretty familiar with. I used to help out a little bit in Nebraska when I lived there with Habitat for Humanity. And the work they do is, I would say they're one of the better organizations in terms of trying to help those in need. But he really did walk the walk. And I think that pictures like these are just the tip of the iceberg, because you hear all these stories of people that interacted with him. And I was telling you this before we went live. It's like, there is not one instance out there of a person sharing a story of their encounter with Jimmy Carter and it went badly. Like everybody who met him, said that he was a joy to be around. He was just one of the nicest people ever. And maybe that's one of the biggest flaws of politics, is that, you know, that whole Machiavellian set of ideas where it's like, you know, a lot of times if you want to help society, you have to be a jerk. And sometimes just being a nice guy isn't enough, especially if you can't communicate very well. Yeah. Any other thoughts about just him as a person? Like,
oh God, I mean, there's so much to say.
Okay, you actually visited his presidential library, right? I have not been there. So tell me about that experience, maybe too.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God, that's the thing about living in the Southeast, is his library is the only one I've been to, actually. Yeah, the Jimmy Carter Library was really incredible. It was funny how because I took an Uber there, and the driver was like, "Man, I've been doing Uber for 10 years, and I didn't know this was here." Like, I had no idea that this was here in Atlanta, and it was very quiet. It was very tucked away, but there was kind of a quiet piece to it. There was a beautiful garden outside, and there were so many things in there. Like, there was his Nobel Peace Prize was in there, and I thought that was quite striking to see in person and to see the span of his entire life. Like, you had a whole section about the Iranian hostage crisis, of course. Yeah, and I don't know, it was one of my favorite anecdotes from when I was there was that it was around Rosalind Carter's birthday, and this was in 2022. So I think that may have been her last birthday even. And me and my girlfriend, we were able to sign a birthday card for her and send birthday wishes, and that always like kind of stuck with me, that personal aspect of it.
Yeah,
because I think it's hard to feel connected to a president in that way.
You mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize. I think I recall only 4 presidents who have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. Is that right?
Yeah, I think
Um,
there's Carter, Obama, Roosevelt, and I don't know who the last one is.
I think Woodrow Wilson is the other one.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh,
but
that's funny.
no, I mean, he did good stuff at the end of World War I. But I mean, no, I think notably about Carter is he got the Nobel Peace Prize way after he was president.
Mhm.
So whereas Roosevelt, Obama, and Wilson got the Nobel Peace Prize like either before or when they were president. And the reason why Carter got that Nobel Peace Prize is like all that stuff he did long after he was president. He just
Mhm.
the constant diplomacy he did for years until he was physically unable to do that. But even when he was physically unable to build houses, he was out there doing that. There's like pictures of him like with where's that one picture? He has like an injury or something, and he's out there still helping
Yeah,
out.
the eye surgery.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find it. Oh yeah, there it is. Gosh dang. So anyway, yeah, let's just. We got some super chats here. Before we get to the super chats, if you have questions for us, we won't go too much longer. But final thoughts about the legacy of Jimmy Carter.
Yeah. I think that Jimmy Carter, I think that he's going to be remembered as a subpar president. I think that we're going to think of a lot of the challenges that he had leading this country. But as you said, no matter how polarized the opinions are on his presidency, I do think that people appreciate him as a human being. They appreciate his post-presidency. And it's funny because I think Carter might be, at least for the foreseeable future, the last president that we kind of have a unanimous appreciation towards, at least personally, as a country, right? It feels like things really polarize after that, but I think that he has a complex legacy as president. But I think that I don't. It was some other history creator that posted it, but they said a person shouldn't be judged for 4% of their life, and I think
Yeah.
that's a statement that really favors Carter in history.
I think JJ McCullough posted that actually.
Oh, it was JJ. Okay, I wasn't sure who it was. Oh, I felt bad.
Credit where credit is due. Yeah, 4% of his life. Well put. I saw online many people post that he was the best human being to ever serve as president of the United States, and I agree with that. Actually, no disrespect to the surviving presidents who are alive right now. Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Everybody knows Trump does not fit that description, but he's more Machiavellian. But even actually, he's not. That's a whole separate video. But yeah, like Jimmy Carter, no doubt. I think his legacy will be. It will still be mixed moving forward, but I do think he's going to move up the rankings. The more historians release stuff about him. Yeah, I mean, obviously, similar to Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover was a good person who did a lot of good things for poor people, especially before he was president. But yeah, not a good president. And I do think, though, the difference between Jimmy Carter and Herbert Hoover is Jimmy Carter actually did have some successes as president, both domestically and international. I mean, again, I can't stress it enough. I think the Iran hostage crisis gets too much attention in terms of his presidency. And I do think that because presidents don't really control the economy that much, like you can't blame too much of what was going on with stagflation on him specifically. It was just the times. But yeah, let's get into some questions. Hey, if you have anything else that pops in your mind, though, just shout it out and I will shut up. Okay, this person, V-Man, hey, Carter gave clemency to Puerto Rican nationalists. This person's always mentioning, I think they're from Puerto Rico, so they're always mentioning Puerto Rico tidbits. So I don't know if that's true or not, but thanks for bringing. Have you heard about this?
I have not actually.
Okay, yeah. Okay, Penn King says Carter was the only president to serve as a scoutmaster in the Boy Scouts of America, as well as earning the Silver Beaver for his service to youth. Is that a real thing, Silver Beaver?
Well, I mean, I think it makes sense. Carter was always quite the overachiever,
That's higher than Eagle Scout, yeah. That's impressive. Yeah, and I knew he had ties to the Boy Scouts.
This actually reminds me. There was a Carter quote that always really stuck with me. He wrote a book about his boyhood called Hours Before Daylight that I think is probably the best book by a president, at least the best one that I've read. And he had a quote in there where he said that up until he was 14, his greatest ambition in life was to help his dad on the farm, and that ambition he felt equally to any other that he ever held throughout his life. And I thought that was just an incredible statement from a man who ended up being president.
I'm so glad I had you on because I have not read many books about Carter at all.
That's a great book, and it's pretty short. You can breeze through it pretty quickly.
I love short books. Okay. All right. Okay. Patrick says gas was the equivalent of $9 a gallon during his presidency. I loved him too, but just saying. See, that's the thing, the buck stops there with the president. That was what everybody was thinking about constantly. So, yeah.
I think gas prices in the presidency become even more relevant considering the last couple of years that we had. People are always going to bring that up, regardless of how much the president actually has to do with that, but it is.
They don't have the button on their desk for the gas price button on their desk, do they?
Yeah, it's the national mood. It's quite something.
Veronica says, and thank you for all these super chats, by the way. Veronica says Bobby Hill concluded he was secretly Jesus Christ back in the King of the Hill days. Bobby, do you ever watch King of the Hill?
I've never watched King of the Hill, actually.
You just read books. You don't watch cartoons like me.
No, I watch a lot of. I think King of the Hill, quite honestly, might have just been before my time a little bit.
Oh yeah, I recommend it. Anything by Mike Judge, basically. He was the Beavis and Butthead guy, Office Space, Idiocracy. Okay. Mode says, I really want to see a full release video of reunion between Jimmy Carter, Walter Mondale in 1995 at Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Oh yeah. So I think you can find this on YouTube, actually. Are you aware of this?
No, I wasn't.
I thought I stumbled upon it at one time. Let me see if I can Google or search it on YouTube real quick. 1995. Yeah, here it is. This is it.
Oh, it's
dominated the political stage in 1976, capturing the White House.
He's going to be one of the great presidents in American history.
39 years later, Walter Mondale and Jimmy Carter shared the stage again at the Four Seasons Hotel in Washington.
He got along well with the peanut farmers, and I figured if anybody can get along that well with peanut farmers, they make a good vice president.
Oh my God, that looks like it was after 1995, doesn't it? Or is the footage just really good for the time?
It could have been like they could have put it through because it looked like it was uploaded just today or yesterday.
Ah,
okay. It's from the archive. So usually that means they put it through a filter or something to make it upscale it.
It is crazy to think of how old Jimmy Carter looked 20 years ago. I mean, he was still around.
Even as president, he looked like an
30,
old man.
30 years ago, actually. Jesus.
Although as president, he famously ran a marathon. He didn't finish it, but he was a pretty good athlete even in his 50s.
Yeah, there was I think while he was in the White House, he ran 4 miles every day.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. That's why he lives so long. One reason. Okay. Let's see here. I got a few more real quick. The jaunty carrot. I've heard some arguments that for all the credit Nixon gets for normalizing relations with China, most of the diplomatic work really happened under Carter. Do either of you know if that's fair? I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Andre. Like, I think.
Yeah, I touched on that briefly. I think obviously whatever a president does, the next couple presidents have responsibility for the execution, right? Especially there where the president gets a little more authority. Carter did a lot of legwork on that, and he contributed a lot to the normalization of the relations. I think that's a really undermentioned part of his legacy. I think that's a really positive thing that he did.
Sure. Dawson says, I'd argue Ford was also a really good person. I mean, yeah, Gerald Ford. I went to the Gerald Ford Presidential Library in Grand Rapids, Michigan, a few years ago, and I definitely learned so much about him that I never would have learned, that made him like, oh, wow, he was like, because, you know, you get these ideas in your head, you just get certain nuggets. Like one of the nuggets I always had in my head about Gerald Ford was like his participation with the Warren Commission investigating the assassination of JFK. And I was like, it seemed like, oh, he wasn't really that deep of a thinker based on what I knew about that. But then you read like his thoughts about this poem that he loved or something at the museum, and like, oh, he was actually a pretty thoughtful guy. You know,
Yeah,
stuff like
that's
that.
the number one request that I get to cover is Ford.
No kidding.
Yeah, and I haven't read any books about him yet, so I really got to get on that one.
Oh, there you go. I think a lot of people would definitely watch. Pig IA must be from Iowa. My dad met Jimmy Carter once in a hotel. Carter came up to him, said hi, and shook his hand. He was truly a great man. Yeah, that's. I'm not surprised.
It's like you mentioned all the famous stories of him.
I heard so many stories like that. V-Man gives some more context here. Thank you for. You didn't have to pay me again. Dang it. In 1954, 4 Puerto Rican nationalists led by, okay, I'm aware of this. Okay, that's what you're specifically talking about. Led by Lolita LeBron, shot up Congress to bring attention for the independence movement. Absolutely. And V-Man brought this up too earlier, that, you know, so many people still in Puerto Rico would rather have independence than become the 51st state. They would rather be just, I mean, that's why many of them prefer to stay U.S. territory for that reason. But yeah, this should be a video as well. Not a lot of people know about this. The Puerto Rican nationalists who
I wasn't familiar with that at all.
Yeah, like I didn't know about it until after January 6th. I was like researching other times the Capitol was attacked, and this was one of them, 1979. That very few times in history that the chambers of Congress were attacked, but yeah. Anyway, we've gone over an hour, and I promised Andre we wouldn't go longer than an hour. So
it's no problem at all.
Before we go, please subscribe to Andre Dutra's channel. Put the link in the description. If you like presidential history, first of all, that probably means that's why you're watching me, why you're watching us right now. But if you want more than I can offer, please watch his videos and subscribe. It has a lot of great, very insightful examinations of, in particular, American presidents. I hope that, by the way, you explore more members of Congress in the future.
Oh, that would be fun.
Like maybe we should collaborate on a video about Newt Gingrich or something, because I feel like he's such a pivotal figure. He's still alive. Maybe we can interview him. I don't know.
That would be awesome.
Check out his channel. Oh, sorry, Jack, I missed your. Carter wrote a book called Hornet's Nest, which I believe is the only novel written by a president. It's a Revolutionary War story. I hear it also features a steamy love scene. Ooh, Jack. Are you familiar with that one, Andre?
No, I'm not actually. But Carter has so many books. It's hard to keep track.
Wow. Yeah. Smart guy. Anyway, yeah. Let's wrap it up here. Thank you for joining me today, Andre.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really do appreciate it. And I appreciate all your kindness towards my channel as well. You were such a huge inspiration. You're like one of the first YouTubers that I started watching back when I was like 16. So to be on here on your channel is an honor. And I really do thank you so much.
Wow. The honor is mine. It's a pleasure to have you here. And it was nice to hang out with you also down in beautiful Miami last summer for sure. All right. Well, everybody watching, thanks for being here. And maybe you should go explore some more about this man we call Jimmy Carter. Rest in peace. Take care, everybody.
Bye, guys.